Talk Show. Recorded live.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Myth or Logic Radio. My name is Tom Murasso from BornToManifest.com, and today my guest is Tobias Lars. Tobias, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tom.
You've been on the show a couple of times, and you contacted me recently because of something that you experienced.
Yes.
And it had to do. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, we also go part of spirit travel. We do spiritual adventures. The inspiration was swimming with dolphins out in Kona, Hawaii, and they basically said to me, "Bring people here, and we can commune and play with each other." And from that group, we go on wolf adventures. We go to a wolf sanctuary in New Mexico, wild horses. We go swim with the manatees in Crystal River in the off season, so it's quiet for us. And we're planning an elephant trip to Laos. But also we go to HOPI land, which is, I'm sitting in Phoenix right now, but I'm driving back up to Sedona just after we're done. And just a little bit north of Sedona on Flagstaff is basically HOPI land, their reservation. And I go several times a year and have some contacts with families up there that can take us sort of behind the scenes. And each time we go, we stop in a place called Wapatki, which is outside by Sunset Crater, outside of Flagstaff, Arizona. And because Wapatki still to this day, the Zuni, who are basically the sister tribe or brother tribe of the Hopi, they're the same people. Their Kachinas are very similar, and they know that. So a couple of times a year, they will actually come to Wapatki and do ceremony because that's where their ancestors lived. It is now managed by the Park Service, but still the Hopis and Zunis will come each year. So part of our preparation, I'll have very few people, maybe 2 or 3 people at the most, that I'll take on these little intimate sort of outings. And just because otherwise it gets too groupy feeling for having a real genuine experience on Hopi land. But we always stop in Wapatki in the Kiva. Kiva is the ceremonial round in the earth, half in the earth, or sometimes completely in the earth as a womb. We're literally enwombing ourselves in Mother Earth. And we go to the Kiva in Wapatki to prepare before we go up to Hopi land. And we've had some very interesting experiences up there. So anyway, we'll talk about it here in a second. But that's what we were doing. We were preparing our Hopi adventure, I call it. It's very interesting every time we go. It's very fluid reality up on the Hopi Mesas. It's literally people experience different things, and we had that happen this time again when we compared notes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're in Kiva.
Yes.
And you're doing your thing there, and all of a sudden,
yes.
Quetzalcoatl shows up in spirits.
That's true. Quetzalcoatl showed up, which we weren't.
Quetzalcoatl, okay.
Yeah, Quetzalcoatl is the serpent, feathered serpent of the tribes of before Cortez showed up. The Mayas and the Aztecs too, and the Incas. I think he probably began with all those tribes. He was with all of them, the Incas and the Mayas. I may have that wrong according to archaeologists' historical perspective, but I trust Quetzalcoatl more than I do those textbooks, to be honest.
Okay, well, thanks for correcting me on. I always can never pronounce that correctly. So, tell me what happened. I mean,
So what happened? We had 3 people interested, and one of the couple that came. They had recently been down at Teoutihuacan, another hard-to-pronounce word, that giant pyramid, the biggest pyramid in the world outside of Mexico City, Teoutihuacan, which literally means where man becomes God. And that, other researchers have amazing coincidences. For example, the base of that pyramid is there's a measurement that is 99% exactly the same measurement as the pyramid in Giza in Egypt. It's just way beyond coincidence. I think it's actually the size of the base. Or anyway, there's certain measurements. I'm not that technical on all that. But so Quetzalcoatl was this feathered serpent, which is kind of a strange imagery for us Western minds. The serpent kind of scares us. We think, the serpent is evil, we've been taught through the Judeo-Christian thing. And
yeah, especially if you read a lot of David Icke's work.
Yeah, and then David Icke talking about the reptilians and all that kind of stuff, which, by the way, if we have time, I had a direct experience with a reptilian years ago, 15, 20 years ago, where he clarified all that. It's a chapter in my book. I call it The Serpent, the Garden, and Moses Revisited. It's the title of the chapter, I believe. The Serpent, the Garden, and Moses Revisited, where that was really explained to me, our fear or our programming around the reptilian thing. Now let's just talk about it real quick. It's in my book called Listening to the Sun. It's on Amazon, if people are interested. And there, as usual, if we feel this through, there's good, now I'm going to play with some imagery, there's good car salesmen, maybe, or bad car salesmen. There's good psychics and bad psychics. We know some of those psychics on the street corner, they're kind of not the real thing. There's good and bad. It tends to be, or the quote, this side and that side of energy in all arenas. So why wouldn't the same thing, of course it will, apply to the reptilian-based form, humanoid reptilian? And that's exactly what, yeah. So that's what happened to me. My brother, it was a friend of mine that appeared as a giant snake. He was a spirit like me, and he simply shared with me. And if you see my picture anywhere, you'll see I look like a blonde Swede. So I'm not, I don't have a reptilian form. So I would suggest because once we do that broad brush, they're all bad. That's just not how it is. I'm joking here about politicians and car salesmen. Maybe we could agree that maybe all of them are bad, but we don't even want to do that. There's goodness everywhere. God is working everywhere. Or that the force for awakening, the force for enlightenment, the force for ease, the force for love. And then there's the opposite force, if you will, that drains energy, psychic vampire, steals, controls, dominates. So that exists, of course, in the reptilian world as well. And so, quote, there's good and bad reptilian energies. Now, Quetzalcoatl, here's the thing, his imagery would be kind of strange for us. A feathered serpent, even though scientists now know that the birds are basically dinosaurs that grew feathers and learned to fly, Biologists know that today. So there is a relationship there genetically between birds and the reptilian form. Now, feel this for a moment. All the shamans in North and South America, the Inca shamans, right, the Mayan, before that the Olmecs, and God knows the tribes we don't even know about. Now, for them, if they were going to have the ultimate shaman Christ, the shaman Christ, in other words, the penultimate sort of evolved to the pinnacle of evolvement, in the Western world, we have those as Christos, Jesus Christ, Yeshua ben David, or Krishna, and I would suggest they're actually perhaps the same spirit, or at least very much brothers. Christ and Krishna, Christ. It's the same spirit, really. And so that's the logos. That might be our Western world of looking at it. Now, here in the Americas, when we had shamanism, feathers and hallucinogenic plants, ayahuasca, San Pedro, peyote, all that stuff, and they're doing it more through ritual earth with the animals. Maybe the Christ spirit, and this is what was shared with us, actually. He shared with us. So we walk in the Kiva, okay? We might as well just tell it. So as we're walking in, and by the way, we put a bubble around us. This is now a federally managed park. It didn't used to be when I first started going to it. But we just put a cloak around us so that we can have private space. And we did. We go to the Kiva. Before we get into the Kiva, this couple that was coming with me, had just been down staying by Teoutihuacan, which may have been the main seat, just like for the pharaohs or for the true teachers like Thoth. Thoth, the Egyptian, may have had the pyramid as sort of his main seat or machine or power or instrument temple. Well, Teoutihuacan, that giant pyramid, was one of those for Quetzalcoatl. So Richard, the man who was walking ahead of us, him and his wife had been down there recently and just finding the secret chambers at Teoutihuacan and all that. So it felt very much to me that he had really connected with Quetzalcoatl. As we walk towards the Kiva, there's a huge lizard, which is not normal. I mean, they're pretty shy if they're huge. And he's got these amazing colors. He's green, he's red, he's orange. And we all notice him. And also he's very strange because he doesn't run from us. He actually stops and turns and looks at us. So I take that as a sign that that's something. I don't know what's coming yet. We walk into the Kiva, and I have us sit in a certain direction. And then we line up the directions, and then Richard spontaneously does a little thing he learned about Quetzalcoatl down in Teoutihuacan, which is a certain way of putting water in the four directions. And as soon as he does that, and now everyone has their own reality. Like there's multiple dimensions, frequencies, just like on radio shows. So not everyone felt this, but three of us did. The one person might not have. All of a sudden, Quetzalcoatl showed up very, very strongly in spirit. And he proceeded to tell us and show us sort of, not with words, but that instant sort of mind transference, showing us in pictures the way dolphins talk. They don't use words. It takes way too long. And he showed us a whole bunch of stuff that you can re-access later. But he also showed us that now is the time that these old ways of travel, for instance, Casa Grande, Arizona, the Kiva here at Wapatki, up to Hopi land over to Zuni, Quetzalcoatl, they would travel instantly. Feel this. It's sort of like Star Trek, what do they call it, the transporter?
Yeah.
Right? He showed us how when they would do ceremony in the Kivas, the adept shamans, the ones that had reached a certain place, could and did travel physically by dematerializing and rematerializing in each other's kivas. They were also used as transport chambers.
Wow.
And so that felt a lot more sense. It made total sense, because how could they have all this connection if they had to walk on foot, because they didn't have the horse, remember, before the Spanish showed up. And so it just was not practical. And so that's confounded archaeologists. How could they have these common things? It would have taken that so long for them to travel all the way from Mexico City to Arizona or whatever. So that was beautiful. And he also showed us that another shaman showed up, a shaman that used to live in Wapatki showed up in spirit as well. By the way, if you Google how the Hopi create their world, there's an article a friend of mine wrote a number of years ago about an experience we had in this Kiva where one of these shamans, and it's time to tell all this stuff now. This is not crazy and out there. It's happening to more and more and more and more of us. We actually had a shaman materialize physically, and this was about 15 years ago in this very Kiva. And and I'm just thinking of that now. That must have been a precursor to what we were being taught. There's no time on that side. On that side, there's no time. We're actually literally walking through space, and as we walk in space, we change time. It's sort of the inverse of here. So we have three dimensions of space here and one dimension of time, and on the inverse universe or the parallel universe, we flip space-time into when I move from this room to that room, I'm actually moving in time. So I can just see now how I had never thought of this before, Tom. How those 15 years ago, that shaman was actually seeing what we were going to be doing. And so he was sort of walking over to us and preparing us. So that was amazing. And then Quetzalcoatl proceeded to share with us, and I know I'm stepping on some grounds here with traditionalists and certain indigenous people, and I want to address that just for a second. There's lots of indigenous people that were taught that we must keep these ways sacred, keep the tradition going no matter what.